This is my story. I never thought I would be the kind of man who writes about his life on the internet. But what happened to me is so unreal, so devastating, and at the same time so satisfying that I need to put it somewhere. Maybe because writing it down makes it more real. Maybe because deep down, I want someone to read this and realize how dangerous trust can be when it's given to the wrong person. My wife betrayed me in a way I didn't even think possible. She didn't just cheat on me, she gambled away my life, my home, my stability. And in return, I didn't just forgive or walk away. I planned, I calculated, and I destroyed her. It started with a letter, one of those boring-looking envelopes you get from the bank that you want to throw in the trash without opening. Except my name was printed on it, bold and sharp, and the word "Final Notice" screamed at me through the thin paper. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. I don't take loans. I've worked my whole life to avoid debt. We had a mortgage, sure, but that was accounted for. We were stable. Or so I thought. I opened the letter at the kitchen table. The numbers hit me first. A figure so large, I felt my chest tighten. A loan in my name. Payments overdue. Threat of repossession. I reread it 3 times, my hands sweating, my eyes catching on the signature line. My own name written in a way that looked like me, but wasn't. "Anna," I called out, my voice sharper than I intended. My wife was upstairs, probably on her laptop. She came down after a moment, casual, holding a cup of tea. "What's wrong?" she asked, like she didn't already know. I slid the letter across the table. "You want to explain this?" She glanced at it, just a flicker of recognition, then quickly masked her face with confusion. "I don't know what that is, some scam." "Don't," I snapped. "That's my signature. That's my name. This is a loan. A huge one, taken months ago. What the hell is this, Anna?" Her hand shook slightly, but she tried to keep calm. Maybe identity theft. People do that, you know?" I stared at her. Identity theft? By coincidence, only my bank, only our house, only my information? No, my gut twisted. "Tell me the truth right now." Her lips trembled. She looked away. That was the moment I knew. Finally, she whispered, "I just needed some help. For us." "For us?" I slammed my fist on the table. "You put our home on the line. You forged my signature for us?" Her eyes hardened suddenly. "You don't understand. I had no choice. I was helping someone important to me." The silence after those words was like ice water poured down my back. Helping someone, not us, not me, someone else. "Who?" I asked, my voice low, deadly calm. She pressed her lips together. That silence told me more than words ever could. That night, after she fell asleep, I dug. Emails, texts, hidden folders. It didn't take long. His name was Daniel, younger than me, sleazy smile in his pictures, messages full of promises and manipulation. She had been funneling money to him for months, and when she couldn't give more, she put my name on the line, on my home, on everything I worked for. I sat in the dark living room, the glow of the screen burning into my eyes, my hands shaking not from sadness, but from rage. I should have confronted her, shouted, thrown her out, but instead, something colder grew inside me. A plan. If she wanted to gamble my life for her lover, then she would learn what it means to lose everything. And I would be the one to make sure of it.
I didn't move like a man whose life had been torn. I moved like a surgeon with a scalpel. First, I needed facts, not fury. I printed every bank statement, every hidden transfer, the screenshots of messages where Anna wrote things I'd never let her say aloud. I traced the money and found a pattern. Small deposits to Daniel's account, then larger withdrawals that vanished into cash. A line of payday lenders who never asked questions, and a private finance broker who liked women with soft voices and sharp lies. I made copies of everything and put them in a folder labeled with his name, Daniel, because names are anchors in a sea of smoke. Then I started talking. I called the finance broker first, posed as Anna, calm, familiar, the voice she used when she wanted something. "Hi, this is Anna Blythe," I said, and I practiced her cadence until it sat right. "I need to renegotiate loan terms. There's been a mistake on my account." The woman on the line recognized the voice from previous calls and started listing options. I let her. I asked questions a woman in distress would ask. I hinted that the money was for relocation, for muscle, for someone dangerous. The broker tried to sell me a consolidation plan. I steered the conversation toward his contacts, names, phone numbers, who on the back end managed collections. Every scrap of intel I could pry loose was ammunition. Next, I called the payday lenders. I wasn't gentle. I presented myself as Anna in a different tone now, more weary, more believable as someone running out of options. "There's been a fraud," I said. "My signature has been forged. I need to put a stop to any further action." They asked for verification. I recited my date of birth, the last four of my own social, details I'd already gathered from years of tax returns and forms. It worked. Bureaucracy trusts paperwork over people. And they froze accounts, issued alerts, pushed flags into the ledger that glint like red teeth. Not a single one of them asked why my wife had the inclination to take loans in my name. They didn't care about motives. They cared about recoverability. While the wheels turned there, I found Daniel's footprints. He'd been sloppy. He used the same throwaway email to register for services. He left a signature at a local tattoo parlor. He posted a picture once with a van that had a phone number on the side. I called the number and pretended to be a client asking about a quote for a small job. The man who answered volunteered Daniel's schedule, the nights he worked, the bars he frequented. I wrote it down.
I could have gone public immediately, gone to the bank with printed copies and screamed about forgery, but I wanted something purer than reaction. I wanted his world rearranged so that every person he counted on would see his name and feel the sting of complicity. So I did something that felt like art. I started seeding. I sent an anonymous package to one of Daniel's investors, a fat envelope with copies of the forged deed, highlighted transfers, and a short note. "Do you know where your money goes?" The investor called me, voice small at first, then furious. "I thought he was legit," he said, and somewhere in the line I heard the keening of a man who'd been made to look foolish. He hired a lawyer and began asking questions that led straight back to Daniel. 2 days later, an investor I'd never met left a voicemail on Daniel's phone that I later played on my own recorder. "We want our money back. We don't like surprises." That voicemail sounded to me like the first crack in a dam. At night, I followed him, quiet in a car 2 blocks behind, watching the gestures he thought private. I sat in a bar where he drank and listened when his guard dropped. "We keep it moving," he told a friend, laughing. "Old man thinks he owns everything." Hearing him speak of me that way, that arrogance eating his tongue, was poison and fuel. I recorded a few conversations with my phone hidden in a pocket. Admission is heavier when captured in your own voice. The cleverest part of what I did, the part that felt like a chess master sacrificing a pawn to trap a rook, was staging a creditor meeting that he would attend. I arranged, through a fake intermediary, for Daniel to meet someone who posed as a new investor, interested in laundering payments through a legitimate shell. He showed up smug, thinking he would charm another mark. I watched from across the table as he shook hands and laid out his scheme. Then, I walked in. I introduced myself not as the wronged husband, but as a concerned local businessman who'd stumbled across an irregularity while considering an investment. I asked for his name. The color drained from his face when I slid my folder across the table, and the forged deed and highlighted bank statements met his eyes. "You're messing with the wrong people," he said weakly, but his voice betrayed panic. The investor, a man I'd quietly hired for the sting, took notes and asked procedural questions about transfers and account routing numbers. The meeting ended with Daniel leaving in a rush, phone clutched, and me with a printed confession of intent. He hadn't meant me to see it, but once you put your plan in ink, you can't pretend it was a joke.
I didn't celebrate. I kept working. I contacted the bank's fraud department with a dossier so precise their compliance team opened a real investigation. I sent copies of the forged documents to the county clerk and asked them to cross-verify the notary stamps. Errors showed up. A notary license lapsed months before the deed was signed. A stamp number didn't exist. Paperwork crumpled like a house of cards. Anna called me 3 times that night, voice raw. "You went too far. You could ruin me." I told her the truth. "You ruined me first." She screamed and then hung up. Her explanation, love, compulsion, a man who promised her rescue, crumbled against the weight of numbers and signatures. She believed she could bury the mess in our life and that I would be none the wiser. She didn't know I read every receipt, and I hadn't been idle while she played with fire. By dawn, the lenders had notes in file, and Daniel had fewer friends pretending ignorance. The first real knock on his life was coming, and when it hit, it would not be a single blow, but a series, born of paper, of people, and of patience.
I didn't rush into headline blows. I escalated in the spaces people never watch. The hallway whispers, the late-night calls that die when you pick up, the small, precise betrayals that make a life leak. After the sting meeting, I kept my folder thicker and my moves quieter. If part 2 was about gathering bones, part 3 was about arranging the skeleton so it couldn't stand. I started with the people he used to brag about. A contractor who bought him drinks, a lender who liked the thrill of quick flips, a bartender who'd once laughed at his jokes. Not accusations, questions that put doubt in their mouths. "Have you seen receipts for that job? Who picked up the cash?" I didn't push, I suggested. Curiosity is a slow knife. They sharpened it themselves. Anna's face changed as the net drew closer. She stopped answering calls from her friends and began leaving her phone face down at the table. Once at dinner, I watched her hands tremble around a fork and asked, flat, "Who is Daniel really?" She looked up as if struck. "He's a friend," she said, the word a stitch that wouldn't hold. "He helped with a job. He needed money." "You risked our mortgage for a friend?" I said. "Not for us," she snapped. "He said he loved me." The theater of her answers revealed more than the sentences did. Love had become transaction. She thought pleading would tilt me back to mercy. It didn't. I began calling Anna's contacts while posing as a variety of men and women, an anxious broker, a curious neighbor, just enough to make people cross-check stories. The contractor who once signed off invoices for my son started asking questions about receipts. The landlord who'd rented storage to Daniel suddenly wanted to see proof of insurance. Each nudge didn't topple him, but it loosened the bolts one by one. Daniel, for all his swagger, was allergic to inconvenience. He reacted to it like a man slapped. The bigger the slap, the more frantic his improvisations became. Improvisation is a form of confession. There was a night I stood across the street from the bar where he liked to posture and watched his pattern. First he drank to loosen, then he bragged into a phone about a new investor. Then he smoked outside with a man who walked like trouble. I stood in a car and recorded the way the man said, "We need receipts or we walk." I didn't want violence. I wanted the ledger to become a witness. Evidence is a slow, steady thing that eats charm. At home, Anna begged. "I can fix this," she said, tears edged with fury now. "You're making me look like a monster." I answered with a step that closed space between us. "You already are a monster to me. This goes beyond a mistake. You used my name as collateral on a lie." Her voice, small, carried a new note. Fear that wasn't for herself, but for the man she'd given money to. "He promised me a future. He said he'd pay me back." "Promises don't sign deeds," I told her. "Paper signs deeds." She started to tell me names, accounts, couriers, nights when she handed envelopes into gloved hands. At first she lied by omission, later she lied by confusion. But when the recorders lit up and a ledger appeared under the lamp, her omissions bent into clarity. She'd kept lists in a drawer, receipts folded under grocery lists, scraps that now read like a confession. I didn't know I'd found the drawer weeks earlier. The weight of her handwriting on paper felt heavier than any scream. I fed little truths to the right ears. A creditor got a copy of a wire transfer and called Daniel's number, demanding to know why the cash was rerouted. A supplier received a photo of an invoice and noticed his company name misspelled. He called me quietly and asked what I knew. I sent an anonymous note to a savings club Daniel used, just a scanned invoice with a highlighted line, cash pickup. They called their lawyer. Men who act on instinct start to act protective of their reputation. Once they do, they ask questions that lead to other questions. The dominoes were close enough that a whisper could make them fall. Anna's panic turned practical. She tried to bribe a notary she'd used, begged a broker to forget signatures, made messy attempts to rewrite a ledger. Each attempt left fingerprints. She left a note in a drawer asking Daniel to burn something. She never saw it again, but I did. I didn't reveal I had the note. I cataloged it and set it beside other things. A receipt for cash, a photograph of a truck with a blurred license, a text where Daniel promised he would handle everything. These were small things that, when stacked, speak loudly in court. I also engineered small reconciliations that forced him into places where others could see him. I arranged a meeting at a warehouse, an alleged logistics partner, where the foreman would recognize a courier name and confirm cash pickups. I nudged a quiet investor into asking for a paper trail at a community fundraiser. Each public question pushed Daniel to answer in public. He did so badly. He stumbled over invoices, claimed clerical errors, and offered to make it right. Offers are different from evidence. Evidence is a net. On the night before I planned to present the files to a reporter, Daniel called and left a message that vibrated with defeat. "I can fix it," he said, voice flat. "I'll pay them back, please." There was no swagger, no charm. That was the sound of a man whose illusions were dissolving. I listened to the message 3 times and felt a small, cold satisfaction. I had not sought to ruin him for sport. I'd wanted him to feel the geometry of consequence, how one decision curves into a life. When morning came, I packed the folder in a manila envelope and left it at the county clerk's desk with a simple note: "Please investigate." Then I walked out and let the machinery begin. The next stages would not be loud. Paper is not thunder, but they are precise, and precision is a cruelty of its own. I had prepared the soil. Now I would plant the seeds that would make his world grow thorns. The moment the paper went public, things lost the soft edges of rumor and hardened into orders and demands. I had not wanted theater. I wanted mechanics. The kind of bureaucratic pressure that grinds a man down slowly until he cannot pretend anymore. The reporter ran the facts with scans attached: the forged deed, the notary irregularities, the ledger that tied cash pickups to Daniel's name. It didn't scream, it simply put documents where everyone could see them. And seeing is what turns sympathy into suspicion. Investors called his phone, and then his friends. Suppliers stopped delivering on credit. The broker's office, embarrassed and frightened, opened an internal audit. And the lenders? They came knocking with papers in hand, their patience thin as a razor. I expected anger. What I got was procedure. Letters, certified notices, lien filings. Procedure is quieter than rage and far more effective. He called me, voice a mix of venom and pleading. "You've gone too far," he spat. "You can stop this." I listened and counted breaths, the way someone counts steps before a trap door. "I'm not interested in stopping," I said. "I'm interested in truth." He laughed then, the brittle laugh of a man trying to make the world sound smaller. "Truth? You think this is about truth?" "It is now," I answered, "and your truth will have to be paid back by you." He hung up. Hanging up is a small, vulgar victory for the weak. At the fraud desk, a woman named Patel slid a file across her cramped counter and said, "We have a good case for civil recovery. We can pursue the buyer, the broker, and the courier, but there's an easier path to restitution if we can establish the funds and recipient." I knew what she meant. Make the trail end Daniel. I handed her my recordings, the investors' voicemails, the courier receipts, everything. She nodded like a surgeon receiving the right instruments.
This will get auditors breathing down his neck, she said. It will also give creditors a target. She didn't promise jail. She promised paperwork that suffocates. I started telling people a single sentence. Follow the money to Daniel. It's a sentence that makes men uncomfortable because it asks them to admit they were fooled. The broker's head office opened accounts frozen in under 24 hours. A supplier who'd been lenient with him for months demanded cash collateral. The landlord who used to wink at his excuses served notice. Isolation does blunt work. It removes the angles a man can hide behind. Anna's calls changed tone. She moved from pleading to bargaining. I'll sign affidavits, she said into the phone, voice thin. I'll say I forged it alone. Take me, not him. The offer smelled of cowardice. You signed deeds, I reminded her. You handed cash. You gave him receipts. She cried then, the kind of raw sound that's part confession and part surrender. He said he would pay me back, she whispered. He lied. You acted with him, I said. You're both accountable. There was a silence that felt like frost. She asked where she could go to hide, as if hiding would unwrite the signatures. There's nowhere to hide from what's on paper, I replied. You made decisions. Now you face them.
While the legal wheels turned, I tightened pressure in other ways. I circulated a redacted copy of a ledger to a few of Daniel's backers, names blacked out but amounts visible, and suggested quietly that unless they sought recovery through civil channels, they stood to lose more. Businessmen who can't afford embarrassment move faster than moral men. They called in auditors. Auditors wrote memos. Memos became subpoenas. Daniel began to answer to more phones than he could manage. He tried to fight back with rumors, painting me as a jealous husband with an axe to grind. It worked in small pools, friends who didn't read beyond the headline, but it couldn't survive a barrage of documents and recorded admissions. At a mediation session I attended at the request of an aggrieved supplier, Daniel tried to speak with that old ease. He offered a plan, partial payments, vague timelines, but when the supplier asked for names of the men who picked up cash, he fumbled and mumbled. I watched a man who could once command rooms turn into someone who could only mutter. The mediator, a dry woman with no patience for charm, said, "Promises don't satisfy ledgers. Names do." She filed a recommendation for civil action. Then came the small thing that changed everything. A recorded voicemail from a courier lad turned over an envelope and described handing stacks to a young man who matched Daniel's description. The courier had been unwilling to talk until he read the article. The article made him feel less alone. He called in and said, "I handed the envelopes to Daniel's man." That phrase, Daniel's man, was a rope around the throat of fiction. The prosecutor's office requested my full packet. I was asked to testify. The system, slow as it is, likes neat boxes. Admissions, receipts, witnesses. I slid my boxes into those neat places. Meanwhile, I began to seed legal pressure in a way that hurt them where it mattered most, their future plans. Daniel had a cache of dreams, a fledgling company, a partner who was roped into a joint venture, a fantasy of moving out of town and starting over. I walked into the offices of one of his prospective partners with a quiet smile and a copy of his ledger. "I value transparency," I said. "You should know who you're about to do business with." The partner walked away. When dreams evaporate, so do the networks men rely on. One night, Daniel came to the house. He was thinner, and the bravado had been carved into something smaller. He stood on the porch and said, "I'll make it right." He sounded like a child asking for pocket money. "How?" I asked. "You can't buy time." He looked down at his shoes. "I'll work. I'll pay them back." I thought about what work meant when a ledger is long and the people you owe are many. "It's not enough," I said. "People want names. They want accountability. They want to know who profited." He swallowed hard. "Tell them I did it alone," he begged. "Say my name and leave Anna out." I thought of the way he had looked at me in the living room when he first admitted it. No apology, only calculation. "No," I said. "You will say what you did, and you will help fix what you broke." He left without another word. By the time the prosecutor called me to set a meeting, the lender letters had multiplied like flies. The machinery of restitution was loudest in its silence. Court filings, subpoenas, asset searches.
I had not wanted him jailed for a petty crime. I wanted him unmasked and accountable. The law offers multiple ways to ache. Civil liability threads a man with repayments. Criminal exposure looms like a distant storm. I chose the slow, surgical ache. The house, our house, waited in the background, a quiet promise that some things could be set right if you applied pressure in the right places.
I had spent months turning whispers into records and records into wounds, but the real work began when I decided to make the creditors look at names that mattered. Papers and recordings had shown Daniel taking cash, but creditors still clutched at process. Who had the liability on paper? That's where patience and imagination win. I started by sitting with one of the lenders in person, a grim man named Hargrove who treated money like a moral compass. I walked into his office carrying a thick folder and a tone that made men politely fearful. "Mr. Hargrove," I said, "I'd like to show you how the money moved." I slid the ledger, the courier receipts, the recorded calls across his desk. He listened, his face folding into the kind of focused anger I'd been waiting for. "If we can show the money flowed to an individual who benefited, civil recovery can name them," he said. Those words were the hinge. I asked him quietly what he needed to pursue Daniel directly. He listed the boxes: admissions, witness statements, proof of benefit. I handed them to him as if I were turning over a recipe. He did the rest. But I didn't hand everything to lawyers and wait. I continued to play Anna in the background, calling as her to ask about payment plans, to sound desperate, to coax sloppy admissions from brokers and intermediaries. I baited Daniel into conversations where he described amounts he'd pocketed, the couriers he used, the people who counted cash. One night, after too many drinks, he told a friend on the phone, "I moved 30 grand last month, clean cash." I recorded it. When Hargrove heard that clip, the phone in his hand felt like a hammer. He issued a subpoena, and the next thing Daniel knew, there were legal letters with Hargrove's name stamped on them. Suddenly, collection calls were not just whispers, they had the weight of legal paper. Then came the artful cruelty: civil suits naming Daniel as the recipient of misapplied funds. I helped compile affidavits from couriers and suppliers who had been scared into silence until the article made them feel safe. I signed statements, I met with investigators and pointed to invoices, and I let the legal teams draft complaints that read like the truth laid bare. Once the complaints were filed, the courts issued temporary restraints: assets frozen, bank holds, liens on vehicles. He called me, voice shredded. "They can't take my car, please," he begged. I told him the truth. They can, and they will, if they can trace the funds. It was a small cruelty to speak plainly, but he had been cruel first. The tow truck that took his car felt to him like the world extracting payment in the only currency it understands. The next move was surgical and required me to be someone I hate, a liar with a purpose. I forged no signatures, I broke no laws, but I used masks, pretending to be an intermediary, arranging meetings where Daniel would admit to routes of payment into recordable spaces. One such bait was a meeting with a finance partner I had hired to play the interested investor. Daniel, hungry for approval and quick money, bragged about how he funneled payments, naming drop points, and a name he called the courier. The partner recorded everything. I handed that recording to Hargrove and to the prosecutor's civil department. When you hear your own voice saying the thing that ties money to you, it's a different kind of proof than a ledger with a blank next to it. Civil judgments came slowly but inevitably. One by one, creditors secured verdicts that listed him personally. They garnished accounts, slapped liens on property, registered judgments that would follow his name for years. I watched as his options narrowed. No loans, no lines of credit, the slow, social death of being that man who can't be trusted to honor a check. He tried to sell things to pay, but I had already placed clouded claims on the titles. Buyers walked away when lawyers asked for a clean title. He tried to move towns and start over, but the internet and court records travel faster than he could.
There were moral costs to this, things that settled heavy in my chest late at night. I had ruined his ability to dream of ease. I had watched a man falter into desperation, but I rationalized it into an exact thing. He'd afforded himself the luxury of other people's roofs and lives, so now his ledger would mark him in hand. It's one thing to be jailed.
It's another to have every future door lined with the phrase, "See court records." Professionals avoid that phrase like fire. Meanwhile, Anna tried to salvage herself by bargaining with the very men she'd betrayed. She approached Hargrove, offered her jewelry, begged for leniency by promising to cooperate and testify. He looked at her the way a man looks at a burned bridge. "You signed off," he said bluntly. "We need names, not jewels." She'd given names to Daniel. Now she had to give names to the law. She started to provide details, handing over transaction chains and courier contacts in exchange for negotiated settlements that wouldn't wipe away the whole ledger, but might lessen his exposure. And that was the cruelest twist. She'd hoped to hide behind promises. Now she was bargaining for the life she'd gambled away. Daniel's employer called him into HR after a vendor alerted them to impending litigation. The meeting was perfunctory and mean. Offers rescinded, background checks revisited. A partnership he had been angling for dissolved with an email that said, politely, that pending litigation made collaboration impossible. He lost not just assets, but the soft currency of trust. People who might have vouched for him now had to think of their own reputations. One small business owner I'd nudged offered Daniel a low-paying job sorting inventory. It was work designed to be honest and exhausting. He took it because what else was left? There were moments when I questioned the line between justice and cruelty. I thought of my father's hands when he hammered a board into place, of the way a roof feels over your head after a rain. I thought of the small things, Anna's laughter in the kitchen, the way that Daniel had once been a kid who skinned his knee and asked for a bandage. Those memories tempered my triumph with a slow, cold ache. But then I'd remember the forged deed on my table, the nights when phone calls from collection agencies kept me awake, the way my life had been casually mortgaged by someone I loved. I had been given a choice: let it slide and let the rot spread, or root it out. I chose to root it out. The legal verdicts, the liens, the ruined reputations, all of them were not vengeance for its own sake, but a curriculum for accountability. He had to live inside the consequences he engineered. When the court issued a default judgment against Daniel for several unpaid sums, the paper read like a map of his failures. Bank holds, wage garnishments, property liens. Each line a small, irreversible consequence. He came to my door one last time before the sheriff's office began enforcing a levy. He placed his head in his hands and asked me to help hide from it. I looked at him and felt nothing like the man I once might have called a son. I told him plainly, there's nowhere to hide from paper. He left, shoulders bowed under the ledger that would follow him the rest of his life. I locked the door softly behind me, and for the first time since I found that letter on the kitchen table, I allowed myself to breathe.
When people talk about revenge, they picture explosions, screaming matches, maybe even fists flying. But real revenge doesn't look like fire. It looks like silence. It looks like watching someone fold in on themselves day after day until the person you once knew is a ghost with your shadow standing over them. That was the ending they wrote for me when they signed my name on papers that would have buried me alive. And this was the ending I wrote back for them. Daniel and Anna thought the house was just a structure, bricks and walls they could leverage for quick cash, but they never understood it was the spine of our family, the place my father laid every board by hand, the place where memories were etched into scratches on the floors and pencil marks on the doorframes where we measured growth. They sold that without a word, as if it were theirs to gamble. And the moment they made that choice, they severed something deeper than any legal contract. By the time the courts were done with Daniel, his accounts frozen, his wages siphoned, his name smeared across every creditor's list, he wasn't just broke, he was marked. The kind of man no bank, no employer, no partner would touch. Anna, desperate, tried to pivot, to save herself by trading testimony like currency, but her betrayal had spread so wide, no one wanted her loyalty anymore. It was toxic, a brand burned into her forehead. I didn't shout, I didn't parade their downfall, I just let it happen. I watched from the quiet safety of my rebuilt life as their world contracted into a narrow tunnel of debt, shame, and suspicion. And here's the thing no one tells you. Revenge doesn't heal. It doesn't rewind time. It doesn't put the house back the way it was or make family dinners taste the same again. It just balances the weight.
It makes sure the people who thought they could dig a pit and push you into it end up trapped in the very hole they carved. In the evenings now, I sit at the table in a smaller house. Not the one I lost, but one I chose. Walls bare, but honest, and I breathe air that isn't poisoned by lies. Sometimes I get letters still, desperate ones, asking for help, for forgiveness, for one more chance. I don't reply. They used my name without my permission. Now they can live with the new name the world gave them. Fraud, debtor, liar. That's their inheritance, the legacy they carved with their own hands. And mine? Mine is peace, not the warm kind, but the sharp, cold peace of a man who was betrayed and didn't crumble. The peace of knowing I answered betrayal with consequences so precise they'll echo for the rest of their lives. That's all I ever wanted. Not apologies, not reconciliation, just balance. And now, finally, I have it.